So you might be wondering by now why this channel devotes such a high content to the Jewish sages, particularly when many of you may think that Yeshua opposed them. In his short time, he said something astonishing. The pasuk I am referring to comes from Sefer Yahshua, Perek 23, 1 through 4, and it says, "Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his Talmudim, saying, The Sopharim and the Peroshim, the scribes and the Pharisees, have seated themselves in the chair of Moshe. In other words, they continue the teachings handed down by Hashem through Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe." Now the passage continues with, "But don't do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them." This is an interesting statement because on the one hand, he is saying to observe their teachings, and on the other hand, he's saying don't do what they do. Now, at the height of the corruption that had crept into Judaism at the time, Rabbi Yeshua is still saying that they teach soundly, but they do things that don't live up to their standards. Many Christians focus on the back end of this saying, and in doing so, they refuse to listen to anything they say, and thus fail to observe the first part of his instruction. I barely know anybody today that studies the Jewish sages based directly off this teaching. In Judaism, it is taught never to appear more important or more righteous than you really are. Yeshua underscores this understanding with his teaching on taking the worst seat at the wedding feast, rather than taking the best seat and being asked to move for someone more honored. In his day, pride was a chief stumbling block for many sages. Some would pray publicly, and the more affluent would openly give large amounts of money to the temple, and even pressure their own Talmudim to support them financially over their own parents. By pressing their own students to funnel any wages they received to their schooling over supporting their own parents was a grave offense, because there was no social security in ancient times, and it was a form of disrespecting parents, which is one of the Ten Commandments. We have to bear in mind that the same man who was against this practice also rebuked a would-be student for wanting to bury his own father before he joined Yeshua, and that one must hate his own family to be received into the kingdom of heaven. Imagine if a Jewish sage said the same things. He would be, dare I say, crucified. Now, both of these statements are sound in context of Yeshua's points, but we have to look a little more deeply into his standing among the sages of his day. As a 12-year-old boy, he astounded them, which means that not all of them were off the derrick, off the path, and as an adult, some Peroshim supported Yeshua. He also went on to say, "Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Peroshim and the teachers of the Torah, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of heaven." And this is from Yahshua 5:20. Elsewhere, he is found saying, "You Samaritans don't know what you worship. For we know who we worship, for salvation is of the Jews." Now the Samaritans were a nation of people who professed to follow the same God as the Jews, but went about it a little differently, kind of like another religion we see today. Rabbi Yeshua's teaching on following the instruction of the sages actually harks back to the Torah itself. In Deuteronomy we read, "You should come to the judges who exist at that time, and you must obey the words that they tell you. You should carefully obey everything they instruct you. You should act in accordance with their teaching, that they instruct you according to the judgments they issue to you. You must not divert from their words they tell you, even if they tell you that right is left and left is right." And this is from Deuteronomy 17, 9 through 11. This rendering is partially paraphrased, but it is the most accurate English rendering you will find. Notice that these passages don't mention following their conduct. Not everybody is able to view the conduct of the sages that are judging them, only their teaching. This is because that as corrupt as the judges may become, Their fear of Hashem will not allow them to teach directly against the Torah. If they aren't keeping an area of the Torah, it will be more subtle. If not, their office is over, as their false teaching gives them away instantly. Torah observance cannot be accomplished without the framework of some type of tradition stitching it all together. This is why the oral Torah is so crucial. Hashem constructed the Torah this way to allow man to be partakers of his will and work out the correct execution of laws in between. But this should be only the forte of the sages, and if anyone does something despite their rulings, they are going against the aforementioned passages in Deuteronomy 17. At any rate, wouldn't you rather be judged on following the official judge's mistake over your own? Think about it. There is an old rabbinic story of a Jew who was judged in Shemayim, and the heavenly court found him guilty of an offence that was subject to Gehenna. On hearing the verdict, the man refused to go. The court asked him why, and the man said, "I never did anything unless it was approved by my rabbi." The court checked his statement and found that he was correct, and despite his rabbi's error, he was spared the torments of Gehenna because of his strict devotion to his rabbi's teachings. This is also why many Jews still keep a few ritual laws that can be argued are not 100% correct. The reason why they don't deviate from these laws is that the last functioning Sanhedrin ruled them that way, and until a newly established Sanhedrin is reinstituted with a functioning third temple, these laws cannot change. If someone does deviate, this is actually going against the sages, which the Torah expressly forbids, and Yeshua expressly forbids. Rabbi Yeshua said, "All that they tell you, do and observe," quoting Deuteronomy 17:10. But the $100 million question is, what about when some rabbis start bashing Yeshua? Well, from their perspective, he was a heretic, a false messiah, and the result of his misinterpretation has led to the catastrophic carnage of the Crusades, horrific inquisitions, and countless blood libels. If a rabbi isn't saying something strong against him every once in a while, we need to look again at that rabbi. For the most part, they denigrate the mythical blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, but yes, some hammer the more authentic persona, and to this we have to be mindful that this blindness to his real identity is by divine decree, and this has a time limit. Simply turn down the sound or forward the lecture past these occasions. What should bother you more, the misinterpretation of the Christian understanding of Yeshua, or the Jews' rightful rejection of that misinterpretation? I hope I've made myself clear on that point. There are literally millions of people wrestling with interpreting different parts of the Tanakh as I speak, otherwise known as the Old Testament, without any thought of looking at any ancient commentary on the subject. Good ancient Jewish commentary is absolutely crucial. Authoritative commentaries are consummately important when approaching any biblical topic. Ironically, these same people that complain that no one reads their own gleanings don't sit down and read the gleanings of righteous Jewish sages that existed throughout the centuries before and after Yeshua HaNotzri existed. Oh sure, they look at other Western maverick teachers like themselves and trot them out, people who do the very same thing, either ignorantly or purposefully ignoring the wisdom of the Jewish sages. They are completely ignorant of the Perushim, the Pharisees, that not only supported Yeshua, but also became his personal undertakers, with one of them giving up his very own priceless tomb to his earthly remains. People approach the Bible like no one in the world ever approached it before, or at the very least approached it like they do. There are people that think there are topics they have questions on that no one on earth has ever questioned before. There have been millions of men and women far more knowledgeable than us that have come to every conceivable topic and left us much wisdom, even in some Christian circles. Some may say at this point that technology and culture has changed things, so many old commentaries are no longer applicable. This is wrong for two major reasons. Number one, technology only serves to allegedly make life more manageable. This is despite dishwashers constantly breaking down and requiring a service, washing machines, TVs, cars and computers requiring repairs and upgrades, catapulting us into a constant financial and life-managing wrestling match that never ends. Technology will only ever try to improve the pace and quality of the lives that we already lead. And number two, all the world's cultures adhere to the same basic values of life, no matter how foreign they may appear at first. Many Western minds often glean wisdom from cultures and times that are far removed from their own, employing Oriental wisdom and Greek philosophy to approach many modern day and ethical dilemmas. So don't let anyone try to worm their way out of the subject with either of these two supposed outs. It is a common diffusion of the subject that is seldom put down soundly. If we look at the subject of Shabbat, any Messianic who seriously chooses to study the subject, or any biblical topic for that matter, should at the very least study the Jewish gleanings on the subject first. Some people who have the wherewithal to really study a subject hard usually have a background in academia and would agree that any research should address all authoritative sources on a given subject. The Jews have an exhaustive collection of work on the Shabbat. In fact, they have written about the subject the most and in the most depth. Yet some Messianics who have academic backgrounds seem to ignore Jewish writings as they dive into a topic. For example, you may find that they are not even familiar with the Jewish sage Rashi, despite his work being so important that it even influenced some prominent Christian leaders of his day. Now, is this because that they subconsciously believe that Yeshua somehow discredited the Jews? Well, the answer is, if we are being perfectly honest, a resounding yes. This is a most unfortunate conclusion. How could Yeshua's view on the office of Pharisee be so horrifically misunderstood? His scathing remarks toward the Pharisees seems to be the thing that fixates in the mind of most Christians, and this mindset carries over into the Messianic movement. Yeshua aggressively attacked the attitude of the Pharisees of his day because they were his peers. It's like two family members who are prone to argue with each other than with a stranger. The Pharisees were members of Yeshua's spiritual family. Therefore, he hits them the hardest. The extreme level of his criticism actually shows that he saw them worthy of rebuke. In Leviticus 19:17 through 18a we read, "Do not hate your fellow Israelite in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor." Now, on the other hand, Jewish halakha forbids open rebuke to a slanderer or mocker. As it says in Mishlei 9:8, "Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you." We know that Yeshua loved the Perushim because of his heavy rebukes. Again, in Mishlei 27:5 we read, "Better an open rebuke than love which is concealed." And again in Proverbs 3:12 we read, "For Hashem disciplines the one he loves, as does a father the son whom he delights." This is a quotation from Deuteronomy 8:5, which says, "Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so Hashem your Elohim disciplines you." The Apostle Paul, otherwise known as Rav Shaul, professed that he was the son of a Pharisee and still was a Pharisee, which is an earth-shattering declaration voiced in the presence of his accusatory peers. Elsewhere he says, "What advantage has the Jew? And what profit is there in circumcision? Much in every way." And this is quoting from Romans 3:1. I've often wondered quietly to myself how Paul's letters became so universally misinterpreted, even one letter itself foreshadowing this climate. Surely there are millions of letters from Jewish sages that contain much sound wisdom that have very little room for misinterpretation that have been written and circulated over the centuries. Surely the hallmark of a good letter containing Torah wisdom is its ability to withstand some level of misinterpretation. Well, if we pull back even further, the Tanakh has been subject to this same misunderstanding, so it might not be the fault of Paul or Yeshua after all. The spiritual standing of the majority of the current generation is quite low, and it's probably no wonder that so many factions of believers exist across the globe, all carrying their own weight and more of doctrinal baggage that they drag along to their own destruction. At the end of the day, when all is said and done, the damage is too deeply rooted in the minds of too many people, and one can easily see why only a remnant now will be saved. Hey there, before you go, if YouTube normally isn't your thing, you can check out the content of this channel also on Rumble, a new video platform for the more conservative viewer. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.